let's talk briefly about something that you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation, and that is that this was not expected, meaning the incursion, the invasion of Russia by the Ukrainian military. Now, it raises all sorts of questions, but one of the things that I'm interested in is to what degree and how good is our intelligence about the Ukrainian military's use of U.S. munitions and weapons during the course of this incursion into the Kursk region?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. So what I'll start with doing is laying out the facts, what we know about what's happened in terms of the tactics and the combat, and then I'll sort of try to answer my current assessment of what the U.S. policy is. The facts are that the Ukrainians are using heavy American military equipment on Russian soil. The 82nd Ukrainian Airborne Brigade, they are operating Stryker combat vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles on Russian territory. That's visually confirmed. We've had M777, 155 millimeter field artillery been deployed to Kursk as well to provide fire support. We've got Humvees and a whole bunch of other equipment from other NATO countries as well. And we've gotten some confirmed HIMARS, GIMLRS, GMLRS missiles with a range of 75 kilometers that have been fired across the international border to interdict Russian targets as well. So we've got a couple inflections here in terms of what we've seen before. We've never seen heavy equipment operating on Russian soil. In the past, we had seen Humvees that were being operated by pro-Ukrainian Russian volunteers, not as part of a large-scale operation, but as tactical raids across the border from last summer. We have seen limited Ukrainian counter-battery fire from HIMARS across the international border to hit Russian forces that were preparing to attack across the border into Ukraine. But we've never seen the Strykers before, and we've never seen the Ukrainians pull 777s into Russia. In terms of what the current policy is. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me just interrupt you just for a second there, George. I have not seen any, but have we seen any reporting or any insight on the White House's reaction on this particular issue, or even from the Pentagon? Has there been any effort to clamp down? Look, they set the table a little bit, right? Initially, they were saying, no, you can't use weapons. That went on for almost a couple of years. And then over the past few months, they sort of give them a little bit of free rein, but only in the border area. So I'm wondering whether anybody in the U.S. military is pushing back saying, wait a second, because the whole fear was escalation, right? And the whole fear was this thing just blowing up because of the use of our munitions into Russia. Has that fear just gone away?
I think it's evaporating over time, right? Because where we were back in April of this year, the policy was strictly the Ukrainians cannot use any American-provided weapons, including just field artillery across the international border, full stop. The one exception was maybe they could interdict aircraft if they were getting close and a Patriot missile could take them out. That would be okay, but it was very, very strict. What changed the policy was what happened on May 10. On May 10, the Russians began their renewed cross-border invasion into Kharkiv, and it became so obvious how the Russians were exploiting the sanctuary that our policy had de facto created, because they were setting up their command posts and their assembly areas, and only after they rolled across the part of the field that's demarked as the international border, that's when the Ukrainians could interdict them, which was stupid. The policies have since shifted because it became intellectually indefensible. And then now where we're currently at in terms of policy debate is we basically, we've witnessed all the counterfactual evidence that you can indeed conduct conventional combat operations with American-provided equipment with the Ukrainians on Russian soil. You can kill them, you can blow them up, you can do a variety of tactical tasks, and it is not the vertical escalation that we're all concerned about into nuclear war, weapons of mass destruction. It is horizontal escalation, a continuation of more intense conventional warfare. And that's what we've been arguing this whole time. Currently, the debate is about, can the Ukrainians use long-range precision fires with the ATACMS missiles to interdict high-value targets and logistics nodes in the deep rear? And currently, the administration policy has not loosened on that at all. I would argue that, in order to create a serious strategy for how the Ukrainians are to actually be successful in defending themselves, we have to remove all of the safety nets and all of the little stops that prevent the Ukrainians from building momentum against the Russians. And frankly, there's a lot of really good targets that the Ukrainians could strike if they had the rules of engagement permissions to hit those targets with the ATACMS missiles.
But what's the downside to that?
Well, the downside is that it comes with more risk, right? Because you're hitting, more sensitive targets in the rear. And by that, I mean command posts, depots that are difficult to protect. You are going to be, you're getting closer to the risky things that the Russians don't want to happen. But I would argue that the risks are actually quite minimal, right? What's going to happen is the Russians are going to get mad. They're going to say you crossed the red lines, but there's very little, I think, concretely that Putin can actually do to further escalate this war that he has not already done. I mean, they're fully invested in this, and this is where they're at. And I would argue that deterrence theory, the same logic that kept us all safe during the Cold War, it's still fundamentally valid. We have nukes too. Firing those missiles deeper into Russia will actually do a lot of good for the Ukrainians as well. If you look at the map, and we publish maps of this, if you look and see the area that the Ukrainians are able to strike with ATACMS missiles, and you map all of just from open source intelligence, the 250 known military targets and installations, many of which cannot be moved, that fall in that range, it requires the Russians to have to protect like 300,000 more kilometers worth of stuff. And as we know with this cross-border invasion, they've had the luxury of not having to protect anything in their deep rear, aside from weak little Ukrainian drones with relatively limited payloads. If we indeed open up this vast, large, deep rear area, it will compel a decision point on the Russian military. Is it going to be, do we redeploy our relatively few high-end electronic warfare assets and our high-end air defense assets, which are currently bunched up in the front in Ukraine in order to protect those forward-most operating areas? Or if this stuff in the rear comes under risk, do we actually start redeploying that stuff, pulling it out of the front, sending it to the back to then protect the vulnerable back? I would argue that, if they don't make a decision and they say, okay, we're going to keep it in the front, congrats, you get free hits in the back and you can take their tail. If they do argue that we're going to protect the back at the expense of the front, congrats, you have a softer front, and the likes of which of doing a penetration battle that the Ukrainians failed in last year become easier to do.